Okay, resume with, let's start with problem 6-7. So the question in problem 6-7 is how much would be paid to the partially secured creditors? First, we will have to identify which of these is uh, secured. Okay. Uh, you can see liabilities with priority here amounting to 42,000. Then you will have unsecured creditors amounting to 200,000. Basically, the challenge on most students here, class, would be on identifying or finding the assets and liabilities, class. Many students would get confused, even though the topic itself is very simple. Many students would get confused, especially in problems like problem 6-7. They would think, where is this partially secured liability? In the other problems, it will always be stated you have a liability and then the amount of security. Okay. In this problem, the amount of secured liabilities class are hidden behind the information for your assets class. Okay, you have basically three assets here: assets of 116,000, another assets for 50,000, and your other assets for 80,000. Okay, from this information, you can actually find the secured liabilities class. Okay, because inside the parentheses for your first asset, you have their pledge against debts of 70,000, meaning you have liabilities amounting to 70,000. And these liabilities are secured by these assets amounting to 116,000. Okay. So if you will be asked, what then is the classification of this 70,000 liability? Okay, this is fully secured because how much is the value of your how much was the amount of the liability? Only 70,000. And the amount of the security is more than 70. The security for the 70,000 would be 116,000. But again, many students would find the difficulty, where is this secured liabilities? Because the amounts given here, the 116 and the 50, pertains to assets. Okay, the information concerning your secured liabilities are embedded in the information provided for your uh, assets used as collateral or security. Okay, so definitely we are not talking about the 70,000 liability in this problem, because as what we have concluded, this 70,000 is fully secured. And what is being asked in problem 6-7 is how much would be your payments to partially secured. So let's try to look for these partially secured liabilities. Okay, and it is actually the 130,000. Okay, the problem tells us that we have assets worth 50,000 that are pledged against debts amounting to 130,000. So we have actually other liabilities in the amount of 130. And what will be the classification of this 130,000 liability? They will be considered as partially secured. Why are they considered partially secured? Number one, they are secured because assets amounting to 50,000 are dedicated for it. But why is it only partial? Because the amount of security is lesser than the amount of liability. Okay? So the partially secured liability here is 130,000. Okay? And it is secured up to 50,000. From that point on, class, we can already eliminate choice letter B, because in no way would we expect that the 130,000 liability will only be paid 50,000, because after all, it is secured with assets amounting to 50,000. At the very least, we will expect the 130,000 liability to be paid for 50,000. Okay, but why is the answer not 50,000? Because for the unsecured portion, it will still participate in the other assets of the entity. Okay, so will the partially secured liability receive the 50,000? Yes. But why is the answer here not just 50,000? Because aside from the 50,000, it will also get additional amounts representing the recovery from the remaining 80,000. Will it receive the entire 130? No, because it will have to suffer a loss class due to the insufficiency of the assets of the uh, entity. Okay, so the issue now is how much then of the 80,000 can be recovered? How much then can be paid for the remaining 80,000? Okay, uh, and to do that, again, you will have to compute for the recovery rate. If you have watched the initial discussion class, again, the most crucial, okay, for computation would be the computation of your recovery rate. And basically, you just need two things, the numerator and the denominator. And in its simplest form, the numerator would simply be the assets, and the denominator would be the liabilities. But to be more specific, we need our net free assets. And our denominator will not just be your total liabilities, but it will be your unsecured liabilities. And how do we arrive at your net free assets? Your other free assets, and then you add the excess from the fully secured liabilities, and then you deduct the unsecured but with priority. And then for your denominator, you will start with your unsecured without priority, and you add the unsecured portion of your partially secured liabilities. Okay, so let's start computing for our recovery rate. Let's start computing first with our numerator. What assets are not being used as a security or a collateral class? We have the other assets amounting to 80,000. So that is where we will start, okay? But again, I will always want you to remember, class. Two things to remember for the numerator, one thing to remember for the denominator. And what are the two things to remember for the numerator, class? Add the excess, deduct the unsecured with priority, okay? So we begin with 80,000, and next would be to add the excess from the fully secured. Okay, and how much is the uh, we have assets of 116,000 pledged against liabilities of 70,000. Okay, so definitely we will have an extra 46,000. Will this 46,000 go to the 70,000 creditors? No, the maximum they will get will only be 70. Where will this 46 go? It will go to all the other unsecured creditors, or it will be used to pay our unsecured liabilities. So we begin with 80, we add the 46. I hope everyone understands where we got the uh, 46. Next would be deduct what? Liabilities with priority. Okay, and is it already given? Yes, in the amount of 42,000. What if it's not given, class? What will normally form part of your liability, unsecured liabilities with priority? Taxes, dues to the government, dues to workers and or laborers, and administrative expenses for the liquidation. Okay, but here we're already given with the total amount of 42,000. Okay, so we will have 80,000 plus 46 minus uh, how much? 42. So that's simply plus 4. So that would be 84,000, and that will be our net free assets. Plus, you could also be asked simply for the net free assets, Lasa. So it's important that you understand what constitutes your net free assets. It's basically the numerator for our recovery rate. It's not always you will be asked how much will be paid to the unsecured with priority, unsecured without priority, fully secured, and partially secured. Okay, you could simply be asked how much is the recovery rate or how much is your net free assets. So in this case, our net free assets would be your 42,000 divided by our unsecured liabilities. And what's the one thing I want you to remember for your denominator, class, for your unsecured liabilities? Do not forget to include the unsecured portion of your partially secured. Okay? Because we have unsecured liabilities amounting to 200,000. Will that be our denominator already? Okay, what do we have to remember? Do not forget to include or add the unsecured portion of the partially secured. And how much is the unsecured portion of the partially secured, class? 80,000. And I hope everyone gets where we got the 80,000. That's the difference between the 130,000 and the 50,000. So that means our total denominator here, our total unsecured liabilities would be 280,000. And that will already be your denominator class. So our numerator would be 84,000 divided by 280,000. We would get 30%. Plus, what should be our understanding for the recovery rate? Okay, that's basically the amount that you will recover for every peso of claim. If you have 1 peso claim, you will get 30% of that, okay, which is 30 centavos. Okay, so the recovery rate is 30 centavos per peso, or simply 30%. Okay. Now, going to the question in this problem, how much will be uh, paid to partially secured creditors? How much was the partially secured liability? 130. Do we multiply the 130 with a 30% class? Do we multiply the 130,000 with a 30%? No, we just multiply it with the unsecured portion. How much was the unsecured portion again? 80,000. So 80,000 times 30% will give you 24,000. But why is that not among the choices? Because the partially secured creditors will not just be receiving the 24,000. What else will it be receiving? It will receive the value of the asset pledged to it. And what was the value of the assets pledged to it, class? 50,000. And as what we've mentioned, uh, we know that at the very least, the partially secured creditors will receive 50. Aside from the 50, how much will it receive? It will receive 24,000, representing the recovery on the unsecured portion of 80,000. So that's why the answer here would be 74,000. Again, as I've mentioned in the initial discussion class, this is one of the easiest topics. This is the topic you're supposed to uh, use as a source of improving your grades, class. Now, even without solving, class, even without solving, could we have could we have concluded that the answer is 74,000? The answer again is yes, because as mentioned, we are sure that the answer will not just be 50. It will not just be letter B, because at the minimum, the amount that they will get would be 50. They will still recover something from the unsecured portion of 80,000. Can it be 200,000 class? No, because the amount of liability is only uh, 130. So basically, there is no scenario that they will receive more than 130. Okay? And then letter A, will the answer be letter A here? No, because if they were to receive the entire 130, then that means they are not partially secured. If they will receive 130, then that means they are able to make a full recovery, and that's not the scenario for your partially secured. Your partially secured will definitely receive lower than the amount of their claims, but they are still better off compared to your unsecured creditors without priority, because there is a portion in their claim that is guaranteed or secured. Okay, so we can actually eliminate choices A, B, and D, even without solving class. As long as you understand what's happening, you will be able to say that the answer here is letter C. Okay, but you can do that in the final departmental exams, but not during our examination, because our examination will be open-ended. But even then, again, this topic is going to be very easy. Please take advantage of this topic in our next examination. Okay. And just in case this problem will be asked as a shotgun problem, what other questions could possibly be asked? We already had the first one. How much is your net free assets? Our answer would be 84,000. Second, how much is the recovery rate? 30%. Inversely, class, you could also be asked, how much is your loss rate, class, or the deficiency rate? Your answer would be the complement, which is the 70%. Okay, that should make sense. Third would be, how much will the partially secured creditors receive? We have answered it already to be 74,000. Next, how much will the fully secured creditors receive? And as I mentioned in the initial discussion, there's no need to compute for fully secured liabilities, class. They would get the full or 100% of their claim. And how much is your fully secured liabilities here? 70,000. So if you are asked how much are we to pay for our fully secured liabilities, the answer would simply be 70,000. How much will be paid for the liabilities with priority? Is there a need to compute for that one? No, because again, they are expected to receive 100%. because they are to be paid first out of all our free assets. So how much will be paid for liabilities with priority class? 42,000. Okay. Next would be how much will be paid to your unsecured liabilities without priority. Okay. You have to compute for that? Yes. But it's very simple already because we have already computed for your recovery rate. How much is your recovery rate? 30%, and all you have to do is to multiply directly the 30% with the 200,000. It is not as I don't want to use the word complicated because even the computation for partially secured is not complicated. Yes. It's not as straightforward. The computation for your partially secured is not as straightforward as the computation for your unsecured without priority. Because for your unsecured without priority, very straightforward. Amount of liability multiplied by the recovery rate. How much is your unsecured without priority? 200,000 multiplied by 30%, they will only recover 60,000. And that would be the answer if you are asked for amounts that will be received for your unsecured creditors without priority. Okay? But of course, some problems, class, especially if only one question will be asked, will focus on your partially secured because it will have the longest computation steps, class. Fully secured, no need to compute. Unsecured with priority, no need to compute. Unsecured without priority, you have to compute, but very straightforward. Amount times rate. So which one is lengthier as far as the computation process is concerned? The computation for your partially secured. But again, the procedure is not even complicated, class. The challenge would just fall on your correct computation of your recovery rate. If your recovery rate is wrong, partially secured is wrong, unsecured without priority is wrong. But again, this will be your favorite topic, class, because even if you will get recovery rate wrong, you can still get two questions right. Liabilities with priority and unsecured without, fully secured creditors will get 100% as well. And that is why this is again the topic where you're supposed to pull up your grade skills. And anytime I see a student who has a very low standing class and would get zero in the exam that involves your corporate liquidation class, it's very difficult to find a reason to pass that student. Okay, the only reason you will get zero for corporate liquidation class is if you don't know anything class. You refuse to know anything. Nobody should get zero for corporate liquidation. You're not supposed to you're not supposed to get zero at anything class, but the topic that you should not get zero should be your corporate liquidation. It's either 100%, a portion of it, and that's it. So if I give a problem and you're asked for the four classifications of liabilities as to how much they would get, and the student will get it all wrong, it's very difficult to find a reason as to why that happened, other than the student refusing to know anything about the topic. Okay, let's proceed to problem 6-8. Moon Company has the following. Okay, so if you'll notice, the presentation in problem 6-8 is different from uh, problem 6-7. And again, many students would get confused based on the presentation. Okay. You have your unsecured creditors, 230,000. You have your liabilities with priority, 110,000. Let's go over the narrative information first. The company also has a number of other assets that are not pledged in any way. The creditors holding debt to want to receive at least 142,000. For how much do these free assets have to be sold so that Debt 2 would receive exactly 142,000. Uh, Many students would find this problem difficult mainly because it involves algebra class. It's not even a difficult algebra class, but simply you're forced to work back. Okay? Let's understand the given first. How much is the value of debt 1 class? Is it 210 or 180? 210. Okay, because if at that point lang you already get it wrong, then you'll have very little chance of getting other questions right. The amount of debt 1 is 210. What then is that 180? That is the value of the asset pledged for debt 1. Okay. How much is the amount of debt 2? 170,000. What is that 100,000 then? That's the value of the asset pledged for debt number 2. Debt 3 is how much? 120,000. Okay, and the 140,000 you see there is uh, the value of the asset pledge for your uh, debt 3. So at this point, we have three pledged assets class, the 180 and the 100 and the 140, giving you a total of 420. But aside from this 420, the problem tells you that the entity has other assets. But the problem here is that the problem did not tell us the value of those other assets. Okay, in the problems we have discussed before, the other assets are given and we need that to solve for the recovery rate. Here, we need to figure out the recovery rate and work back from the recovery rate to determine how much then was the value of your other assets. Okay, but for the sake of exercise class, let's classify debt 1 first. Is it a fully or partially secured? Partially because the pledged asset is lesser than the amount of liability. Debt 2, also partially. Okay, debt 3 is fully secured. Now, we should focus on debt 2 class. Debt 2 is 170,000. And how much do they want to receive? They want to receive 142,000. Okay? For us to work back for our other assets class, we need the recovery rate. Okay? And normally, what's the formula for the recovery rate? Net free assets over the unsecured portion of the unsecured unsecured liabilities. Now, we know that debt 2 class will receive 142. The problem tells us that. Okay? And we know that the total liability for debt 2 is 170. So the question now is the recovery rate equal to 142,000 divided by 170? No, because remember when computing for the amount that will be received by partially secured creditors, the amount that will be multiplied with the recovery rate will only be the unsecured portion. How much then is the unsecured portion? Unsecured portion of debt 2, how much is the unsecured portion for debt 2? 70,000. Okay. How much aside from the unsecured portion, how much will that to be paid class? It will be paid 100,000. Okay. So I hope you understand what's happening here. Debt 2 wants to receive 142. It is already guaranteed to receive 100. How did we know that it will receive 100? Because there is an asset pledge for it in the amount of 100. How much does debt 2 want to receive in total? For 142. So aside from the 100, it wants to receive additional 42,000 as payment for what? As payment for the unsecured portion. Okay? So the amount of liability is 170. It will be paid 100 from the pledged asset. There will be an unsecured portion of 70. And it is okay that it will just recover 42,000 out of the 72,000 unsecured portion. And you will now be using the 42 and the 70 class to figure out the recovery rate. Because the only way that the partially secured will receive 142 class is if that debt 2 will receive 42,000 for the 70,000 unsecured portion. So we'll use 42,000 divided by 70,000. How much will that give you? Is that 60%? So 42,000 divided by 70,000 will give you 60%. And what is that 60%? That will be your recovery rate. So if you will be asking this problem, how much was the recovery rate for debt to receive 142,000? Your answer would be 60%. Okay, and with that class, you can already figure out the rest of the uh, numerator denominator for the recovery rate. Remember that your recovery rate is 60%, and 60% is equal to net free assets over total unsecured liabilities. Okay, what are we looking for? We're looking for our other free assets. Okay, and normally we begin with our other free assets, but in this case, we are looking for that amount. So let's skip that one. Let's replace that with x. But what are the two things I always want you to remember for the numerator class? Uh, Add the excess from the fully secured. Do we have any fully secured here? Yes, how much? Uh, Fully secured, sorry. Fully secured here is the debt 3. Okay, the debt 3 is only 120 and the value of the pledged asset is 140. So how much then is the excess class? 20,000. Okay. Does anyone have a marker? Can I borrow? So we already have we already have 60% class, and we just need our net free assets and our total unsecured liabilities. Okay, this is what we need. Okay, we need to add the excess. How much is the excess class? 20,000. And then deduct what? Liabilities with priority. Okay, this is the second thing I always want you to remember for your numerator. Next would be denominator. Where do we begin? Your unsecured creditors, which is 230,000. But what do I want you to remember? Always add the unsecured portion of your partially secured. Is that one partially secured or fully secured? How much is the unsecured portion? Okay. That's what's unique with these problems, that you have two partially secured. Okay, they were not all lumped together, class. Okay, so even though I only want you to remember one thing for the denominator, in this case we'll have to do it twice because we have two kinds of partially secured. What's the second type of partially secured? It's debt number 2. And how much was the unsecured portion? 70,000. So over 230 plus 30 plus 17 is this 330 class. You throw it. It's 330. And knowing that this should result to 60% class, you can already work this back. Okay? What should be your numerator class so that your recovery rate would be 60%? How much is 60% of 330 class? 242. How much? 198,000. So is our answer here 198,000? No, the 198,000 is your total numerator. But what are we looking for? We're looking for your other assets. Okay? So 198 then is your x plus 20k minus 110. So please work that back, class. 178 plus 110, it's 200. Why is it not in the choices? It should be 288 class. The answer here should be 200. No, wait. Again, that did we include that three? No. Yeah, it's included there. Because the answer should be 288,000. Okay, we'll stick to 288,000. The question is for how much do these free assets have to be sold so that debt two would receive exactly 142. Okay, uh, the suggested answer here is 308. But if your free assets class are sold for 308, remember that you will have to add pa the excess and deduct the liabilities without priority. That would result in duplication. The answer here, I'll stand by 288,000. Okay, the answer here should be 288,000. Let's just, it will be too, we will not have enough time to finish 6-9, 6-10. Let's just explore more for 6-8. If you'll be asked how much would be paid for that one class, how much will that one receive in total? Uh, of course, it should receive more than 180 because that's the value of the pledged asset. What do you do here? How much is the unsecured portion? 30,000. And you multiply the 30,000 with the recovery rate of 60%. And you would get 18. So the total amount that they would receive would be 198,000. Next, debt 2 again, as stated in the problem, will get 142. How much will debt 3 receive? 120. Then on your unsecured creditors class, how much will they receive? Simply multiply 230 with 60%, and that will give you 138, 138,000. How much will be paid to liabilities with priority class? 110,000. So just imagine one problem, four questions class, and two are dead giveaways class.